I am Dr. Shalini Lal. I'm the founder of Unqbe, an advisory and consulting firm around the future of work. And I have with me two amazing panelists, Vishpala and Manu, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves before we just jump into the discussion. So over to you,
Cool.
Vishpala.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Vishpala. I represent Philips today, actually. I currently work with them as the head of human resources for the Indian subcontinent. Coincidentally, me and Manu have been colleagues in the past, so it's really nice to jump onto a call with both Dr. Shalini as well as Manu. So excited to be here.
Lovely to have you, Vishpala. Manu?
Hi, Dr. Shalini, and it's a pleasure likewise, as Vishpala stated, to be a part of the panel with colleagues, friends. It makes the conversation much easier. In the corporate world, I currently represent Sony Pictures Networks as the Chief Human Resources Officer. And in personal life, I'm a happy human being with twin daughters who are driving me crazy lately with the subject that we're about to talk about. So look forward to talking more.
No, I think that is just a perfect segue into actually our first question. And let me start with the fact that, when my kids are actually adults now, but when they were quite little, I used to long for options where, there was some flexibility in the way we worked. And I often got it actually from the organizations I worked with. I often got the opportunity to work more flexibly and spend some time working from home. Yet I also realized nothing is quite as simple as that. And particularly if you have a couple of kids, it can get quite interesting working from home. So let me just, start by asking you, Manu, since you just introduced the fact that you have two girls, what do you think it's actually like for women? Because women long for that flexibility, so many. But what do you think the actual experience of working from home is actually like?
So I'll respond to it in two facets, what I call as before COVID and after COVID. So prior to COVID, I think the organizations were defining what they used to say as future focused, future ready cultures. And one of those future ready culture enablement used to be centered around creating inclusive practices where hybrid work could happen. Also, culturally, we are able to get a lot more women in workforce by enabling practices like work from home, work from anywhere as for that matter. Those in my mind were a lot related to the perspectives on inclusion and diversity. And I think when women would get that, it used to be almost considered as an eligibility and as a perk, which came along with your job. So you had to work a lot more harder to prove your worth in the organization. And alongside, you were getting these flexibilities. What the pandemic has taught us in the last 1.5 years is a reality that has shifted the human DNA fundamentally. And I'd say that in my mind has created a good and not so good environment of work from home for everybody. It's not just women. I think it's as much partners, youngsters, students, anybody who's today experiencing this work from home, do it as compared to choices. So I would say that in the current context, after 1.5 years, it has been overwhelming. I would long for a day to go back to office and possibly be a part of the social thread where you could share a coffee and possibly have a laughter. At the same time, I would definitely say what work from home has done is it has brought families closer. Women have found it far more easier to balance their life needs, which used to be a challenge, as I stated, and almost an entitlement which was coming into you and you had to work harder to prove on it. So that's the experience at this point.
No, that's absolutely very, very interesting because I think it is the complexity of this reality that, we look forward to it. And then, as you said, after 18 months of it, many of us are also, longing for more social interaction, more coffees, etc., etc. Vishpala, I'm wondering if you would like to start off by sharing maybe your own personal experience with how has work from home been? Since, as Manu said, For most of us, it was not necessarily a choice, but it was very much pandemic driven at this point. So how has it worked out for you?
Yeah, sure. I think, like Manu, I have two kids as well. I mean, in middle school and senior school, so a little bit probably older. I think the short answer, personally, Shalini, it's a mixed bag. I think we're all saying the same things, right? So there are goods and bads and challenges as well as positives. And I think the other thing I agree with Manu is that it's not gender specific. I don't think like we can generalize and say it works for men, it doesn't work for women, or vice versa. I think it's got to do a little bit with your life stage and also what your drivers are, because we constantly hear of, like, say in the IT side of the world, where you have young sort of the workforce who are living in these larger cities and very small, probably where it's actually very tough because you don't have the space, you don't have access to some of the like your coffees and your, then it suddenly becomes like, do I really need to continue to stay this, like, smaller sort of contained space, kids or no kids, right? It's just for them to be productive. Versus if you probably look to say fathers, mothers, caregivers, even if you don't have probably children, because you don't have a big challenge is you don't have staff, right? You don't have help. So even with sort of parental duties, I think like everyone talks a little bit about that working much harder, not just at work, but even at home. And this is true for men, this is true for women, like, doing kitchen duties, which you probably didn't do. So I think it is a mixed bag. For me personally, I think it probably works as long as you have some basic infrastructure, right? And I think for my children, it probably works because as I'm speaking, right, my younger son has navigated the way of not coming into the camera screen, but coming and putting my, mic on mute, asking his question and quietly slipping away. I haven't figured that with his class, right? I'd probably still go and pronk my face in front of his teacher's camera. So, there are these fun moments as well, I think, and we're all learning and we're all probably going to get to that world where we all agree that some social interaction is good, but flexibility is, I think, the key winner, where every individual chooses, do I want to do this? How long do I want to do this? Is probably going to be that interesting cusp from the future standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. In fact, over the last few months, we interviewed several academics actually across the world who are studying this whole phenomenon of work from home and hybrid to see, what is it that they're getting as both from their research and from their work with organizations. And one of the things we're finding is that on the one hand, this is something, the opportunity to work from home is highly valued, particularly by parents with young children. But at the same time, it's actually the hardest for parents with young children. So, extremely helpful in managing life, but it's still fairly complicated. I was wondering if you have any thoughts around whether the situation in India gets a little more complex for many people because, sometimes the family sizes are larger or you're living in a joint kind of family. And as you said, very often, the ease of work from home is so dependent on your infrastructure, the quality of your broadband connection, whether you have a space that is quiet, relatively undisturbed, at least for, some periods of time. So wondering if you have any thoughts around how this has played out in India specifically.
Yeah, absolutely right, Dr. Shani. Like if you look at some of, again, the younger folks who've gone back to their native sort of places, which are those tier 2, tier 3 cities, because most companies have actually said, yeah, go work from anywhere. I think the acknowledgement has been that the infrastructure has improved. So this has been an opportunity for India, all of us, right? We've upgraded our broadband connectivities. And I think like we feel more connected today than maybe a year ago, right? Or we have more confidence that the call will not drop as we're trying to record this conversation today. So I think that's the positive, that it's improving. Are we perfect? Are we similar to like, don't you have an electricity outage? Because it's so common in every call. Hey, my connection is dropped. I'm dialing from a mobile. So I think at the jugaad works in India, right? Like 2 devices, 3 devices, like whatever, like you'll figure it out. So I think that's the positive, like we're adapting from an infrastructure standpoint. I think the other big predicament, I would say, like honestly, in India is this whole concept of roles and societal pressure. And that's where I think the women, I don't want to stereotype here, but majority of women have the role of being that singular person who's going to cook, who's going to clean, who's going to look after their children, who's still going to do all their work. So at least our internal sort of data suggests that that's probably the reason why sometimes women tend to be a little bit more stressed with this whole work from home, right? They love the flexibility, but I think that's very, very deep rooted. And I know the society is changing. We're challenging these parameters and all for the right reasons. And we have lovely examples of probably both genders probably dividing their work equally. But I don't think we're yet there, right? Like in terms of many other sort of countries. So I think that adds that dimension of complexity from a gender standpoint as well.
I think, Vishpala, what you're saying is it's absolutely even reflected in all our data. And as of course you know, and everybody knows, that the pandemic has been extremely stressful for women in multiple ways. And India's labor force participation has taken a nosedive in the wrong.
Exactly.
So we have had a very, very, far bigger challenge than I feel we have completely been able to wrap our heads around and, to be honest, understand. Manu, what's your sense? You also work in a global organization. Do you think the challenges in India are any different from anywhere else?
I'd say yes. They are very starkly different. And many a times when we have conversations with a lot of our counterparts in the rest of the world, this statement for global organizations to hear from India that India is unique, India is different, is almost used to be almost taken with a sense of cynicism. But with the last 18 months of experience, the rest of the world has also understood that the dynamics of the country are far different than the rest of the world. And I'll state it in 2 to 3 factors. One factor is definitely the entire societal framework, which Vishpala highlighted. The others are centered around the economic disparity. You have almost 70-80% of India, which is rural today. So even if you and I may have 1 gigabyte, 100 Mbps network connections, there are kids in rural villages who are actually learning through a mobile headset. Imagine the quality of education, what it will bring to them. And that in my mind is one of the biggest fears that I have, which the current pandemic has created. The third angle, societal, the economic disparity, the third angle actually goes down to really the difficulty of and I would say steers of working from home, which haven't been easier. Some of it Vishpala highlighted for females, but I'll say it for men as much. Suddenly, there is a presumed, expectation that because you're not traveling, you can start your work at 8 a.m. Because you're not traveling, you could possibly stay and have a conversation at 8 p.m. at night. So those official boundaries, which at least gave a human being some time out, are completely disparaging, because Indians by design like to push the needle harder and harder and harder and prove to the rest of the world that I can work harder plus one. And that I think is the core spirit wherein the stress factors across companies, across industries are very, very high. And I'm not even any minute undermining the economic pressures which a lot of sectors are facing right now. So that is also one of the driving factors for the third point for me.
Very well said, Manu. And I think you really hit the nail on the head with the fact that I think in India, there's a lot of pride associated with being available at any time, and we sort of almost feel suspicious of people who don't make themselves as available, at any time to their organization. So I'm wondering if your organizations have given any thought what kind of format, of work will emerge for you as the pandemic recedes. Whether you're planning to return back to the office as before the pandemic, or continue working from home, or a hybrid model with elements. Vishpala, would you like to take this first?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think today everyone in HR is busy doing this, right? Like we're trying to predict what this future of work is. And I think the good news is, and I was just saying this to someone yesterday, I think for the HR community, right, like a couple of years ago, there was all this focus on what performance management can be, should be, ratings. And I feel we're a little bit similar. This is much bigger, much more complex. And I think the honest answer is there's no one shoe fits all, right, in that sense. I think for us, simply put, Dr. Shalini at Philips, we've taken a call, will be hybrid. I don't think we're going down to say that you can work from anywhere, right? And I think simply because from a culture standpoint, like for Philips, it is a very innovation-based organization. And if innovation is core and product development is core, we believe that bringing teams together, right, to collaborate, to brainstorm is so instrumental in the success of the organization. So we've taken a call and we're calling that out. Now, I think come pandemic, like whether it recedes, because obviously it links to the different country statuses, obviously how you adopt to that may look a little bit different. So I think the two pieces are hybrid is here to stay. The second is like, obviously we're relooking to say, how should the office space look like, right? Like where we're kind of encouraging more sort of collaborative sort of work. And again, there's elements of change because again, what's the role for the managers, for the employees? Because we get tons of questions. Hey, we've been working outside of our base city for the last year and a half. Can I do this for the next 2 years, right? So I think we're trying to also clarify why our policy is both good as well as that provide flexibility to enable some of this, but yet to bring them back to say, hey, here is the core. So yeah, simply put, I think that's how we're thinking.
Vishpala, can I ask you a couple of more questions around the hybrid model itself because hybrid can take so many different shapes and forms.
Yeah.
Are you planning for a hybrid form where intact teams come to work on the same days, or is there?
No, I think for us, we're putting the role at the center, right? To say that we're actually looking at 3 or 4 types of roles. So we categorize types of work, right? Linked to skill sets and the requirements. So for instance, a person who's in a manufacturing plant, right, has to be in the plant. A person who's in an R&D lab has to be in the lab. It's very difficult to generalize, or a person who's in sales will be on the field. A person in HR, right, can be a teamer, can really kind of come in and come out. So I think we're kind of taking an approach more linked to the types of roles. And then within that, Dr. Shalini, we obviously have like some, I won't say rules of engagement, but ways of working, right? To say, when do you come to work or when do you not come to work, right? Like what sort of meetings do you come to work? Because then it's kind of part of the change. And I think the last piece is depending again on the type of work, because if you have like what we call the global business services, which is more process related work, you will have to schedule, right? You have to roster, right? And I think that's true for some certain jobs, but there are some jobs that don't need that sort of scheduling. So again, I don't think we're going to go extremely rigid. There's a lot of flexibility to accommodate what an employee wants, but more importantly, what the business wants and what, is really and then it kind of all comes together. That's why I said it's complex. It's not as simple as putting one document out there and saying, hey, this is our sort of philosophy.
Well, we've seen that even in the pandemic, particularly which the essential services kind of organization to keep operating.
Correct.
And
Correct.
Within the essential services organization, particularly the more, the large diversified ones, seen how this model of different forms for different kinds of roles has actually worked quite well. And I think what you're referring to is just judging the remote potential of different functional areas or different roles and using that to more specifically design the format of hybrid. I also heard you say that in response to the questions of have moved away from some locations, hometowns, etc. But one of the expectations will be that they will come back to metros.
Yeah, I think when candidates ask us as we're hiring, saying, hey, I'm in this location, anyway, no one's working. Can you commit to me that I don't have to come to this location for the next 2 years? The answer is no. It's saying you probably will have to come back to safety calls. As your role is being categorized as virtual, right? But those are earmarked roles. That's not like for everybody, but otherwise for everybody, as we said, it is that hybrid model. So I think it's evolving. I mean, people are questioning, and I also say that if you look around our environment, right, like the US is starting to open up. You suddenly now will have many more organizations who are actually asked in the September, October sort of time frame. Again, it depends by country, way too complex, but as long as you're kind of, operating in those broader principles, I think it should be fine.
Right. Manu, what about your organization?
I think Vishpala kind of has a part of it. Our thinking akin to the industry that I'm a part of is very similar. For us, creativity and collaboration are at the heart of driving our business operating model. We produce content every single minute of the day. Every single minute of the day, somebody is imagining what that paranormal content would look like, what that alter reality would look like. And that creative lens does not come only by sitting in isolation in a house, in a home. It comes in together when many people are coming in together to put together, to put entire format together, and then taking it out.
A lot of research this year around how employees and employers have viewed work from home and flexibility shows up the fact that for employees, they really value the flexibility that a hybrid sort of model offers. In fact, in one of the largest studies done at Stanford earlier this year of 22,500 people, one of the interesting findings was that for employees, it's a perk. So they're they are willing to assign a monetary value to the flexibility which a hybrid workplace offers. Wondering what your thoughts are around whether this is going to become a differentiator for your attractiveness as as an organization seeking to hire. Just like at one point in time, employees used to consider, is this a 6-day working? Is this a 5-day working? And there was obviously, a very strong preference, and I think almost everybody, to work with organizations that offered 5 days. Of course, from that time, most organizations moved to 5 days, and that sort of became the norm for a large part of the non-manufacturing work, at least. So wondering if you have as yet had any thoughts around hybrid and flexibility as a perk, given the fact that so many people seem to love that?
So, as I stated, that our thinking and our approach to drive strategic advantage from the hybrid model is getting uncovered by the day. And every test case is giving us a positive reaction to say this is in for the future. It fundamentally has to shift the DNA of my corporate culture. Having said that, my view on this being a perk, work from home or work from a location of your choice being a perk, is now converting by the day as a fundamental foundational cultural tenet. And the reason I state it is primarily because at an erstwhile pre-COVID era, that definition of perk was associated with an additional advantage that you got if you got a location of your choice or if you got to work out of home. Now it's almost a necessity. And I don't think candidates would even look at it from a strategic advantage or disadvantage perspective. They would almost expect it. You saw the recent example, Apple CEO rolls out the message 3 days in a week, employees have to be in office. And the biggest retaliation happens where employees decided to walk out of working with the world's most recognized organization against their choice to come back to work. So I'm saying this movement has not just happened in a millennial crowd, it has happened across all walks of life between men and women. And sooner organizations realize that this has to become a part of my core, the better it will be for them to thrive and possibly get the best talent in the market.
So interesting you should say that, Manu, because even, and I've seen this cuts across age groups, to be honest.
Everybody.
In fact, whether you're 30-something, 40-something, or 50-something, people who have enjoyed the experience are now wanting to retain that in some form, not necessarily working from home for all days a week, but at least some form where they have the flexibility to come to work and work from office. And I think one of the biggest discoveries has been how much can actually be done remotely. Just as we've also discovered how much else, we long to come back to work from, the social ties, the having coffee, the creativity which comes when you're all sitting together. And I think, Manu, you spoke about that. So we've sort of discovered over the last 18 months a bit of both, that, oh, wow, there's a lot that we can do, which we never knew we could do so much while we're working remotely. And at the same time, oh, but we do also want to go and have that in-person brainstorming meeting. So that's been really interesting. Vishpala, I'm wondering, what are your thoughts around the attractiveness of an employer based on whether they offer flexibility?
Yeah, I think, Dr. Shalini, I would say that it's not a perk. I think, I kind of agree to Manu's point of view, right? This has pretty much become a necessity in some sense. And honestly, one of the bigger challenges I think most companies are facing with is to say, okay, you have a policy, you've decided you're going hybrid. And many countries, how do you really incent people to come back to work? It is going to be a challenge in the short run, right? Because it's been an extremely long period of time, to your point, to say I'm as productive, I'm doing this. So you want it, but how do you break that habit? You probably need to, like this whole bit about, oh, I need to wear my workwear and go to work. Like I need to drive that 45 minutes and go to work. So I think the hybrid, or if companies are choosing the work from anywhere model, is to incent people to come back, to say, hey, we understand that, but remember the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So I don't see that as a perk, because it's the reality of today's times, and it's probably a reality of the output or the outcome of this pandemic, right? Where beyond a few roles, this is probably going to be available in most places, right? In some form or shape, it can vary. And then employees will choose, right? At the end of the day, to say, like the example you gave, 6 days versus 5 days, maybe the hybrid of 4 days versus 3 days, right? Or maybe like I hear of companies say, come 1 week in a month. So it's going to look and feel so different. And then it'll become an employee preference thing, but not a perk. It's a ways of working, I would say. Or if you choose today to work in sales, many of us have to work 6 days because that's the need of the customer. Similarly, it probably will get aligned a little bit more to nature of work, type of industry, and then people have to choose.
Yeah. Are you getting pushback as well, Vishpala? Because we're also seeing, so on the one hand, absolutely an overwhelming majority of people have loved the flexibility and are looking forward to going back to work with organizations where, it isn't as hard and fast, Monday through Friday, this time to this time, as it was pre-COVID. We've sort of had a taste of how much can be done. But at the same time, there's also a wave that says, can't wait to have everybody back in office. And there is almost a reactionary force, across the world of, it's a smaller number, but a certain number of people who feel very strongly that, the most productive and most effective way of work was actually the original one. So I'm wondering if you've experienced any of that in your organization.
I think so. I absolutely think so, right? Because again, if you look at like people's preferences and choices and experiences, they're bound by what they've seen, right? Or what they've experienced. And I think you'll have both, right? Some people who want extreme flexibility, some people who want like, hey, we do 100% of our time at work, and that's when we're productive. Conversing, I think people are changing their minds because of what we've probably seen through. But if the company, and I think that's where this concept of inclusivity, right, kind of comes in, that everyone has to thrive. And that's why this concept of, I don't think at this stage, right, Dr. Shalini, is unless your real estate strategy does not support it. If you say I have a 3:2 hybrid working or a 4:1, an employee chooses to say, but you know what, I want to come 5 days. I guess it's okay if they come, but if they start expecting their teams to come, all their meetings to, that's when you probably have a cultural sort of challenge. So I think it's okay for people to choose, but as long as they don't probably thrust that on other folks, right? And especially senior people, right? I would say that senior leaders, as we all know, have to probably role model this change to say you're coming to work, you want to collaborate, you want to collaborate, you want to, not just like sit in a corner and like clear your email, right? At least like for us, we're not encouraging that behavior even with our senior most leaders and saying, hey, don't come to work if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, yeah. Manu, what are your thoughts around this?
So in my organization, remote working is no more being pushed back. I wouldn't say that. As I stated before, more and more test cases have given us enough proof of concept that it is here to thrive and it is here to survive. So we've accepted that reality. How do we convert it to becoming a cultural thread of the organization is what we are intended towards. So in a way, there's no pushback. However, there is a classical leader dichotomy. A classical leader dichotomy wherein, as Vishpala rightfully pointed out, the senior most leader of the organization may want to come just because their classical conditioning is more congenial to work from an office space. And this holds true a lot more when you're working in large metros like Mumbai, wherein the density of population is high, homes are smaller. So a leader may decide to come and spend some time aloof out and get that distance. But what in turn it does is it creates a ripple effect. Hey, my boss has come. I need to go. I am almost in my mind, I'm obliged to go. My earlier reaction that Indians by design like to work harder, prove themselves, so that presentism comes into the picture. We are facing that. And in order to drive a neutrality of behavior there, we are urging all our leaders to ensure that when they visit office, first, they do not make it an agenda for their whole day in office to be packed with in-person meetings. Because by design, the moment you will pack your day with in-person meetings, your next level of team members will be obliged to come. And there could be a pushback or there could be a very genuine reason wherein a working mother with no crash facility, with no parental support, may find it very difficult. And she may feel aloof in getting included in a full office meeting and where she is the only one who's on a Microsoft Teams or a Zoom. So we're urging leaders to split their presence, in office as much as possible, not encourage employees to be in office both for safety and health reasons, unless and until it warrants them to come together and drive a business agenda. And the business agenda for us is very clear: creativity and collaboration. If your business need is to come and create the next content, you're free to come in, but make sure it's not all 5 days in a week. If the need to collaboration is so high that sitting at home and sitting in a Teams or sitting in a Zoom meeting, you cannot get the job done, please do. So in a nutshell, that thread of a leader behavior is what we are trying to work with.
Yeah.
We haven't had full success because that classical conditioning of an Indian mind sometimes prevails over a very natural inclination of a leader who may not be wanting you to come, who may just be wanting a solace to be in office, but the team members take it otherwise.
Yeah, no, I can completely see what you're saying. I remember that, there were times when senior leaders would work Saturdays or Sundays, and automatically their teams, it wasn't a mandate, but they sort of felt that their careers would do better if they showed
Absolutely.
up on the same days. And one of the interesting findings of, actually the only experimental study on what happens when you work from home, which was done in a call center in China. And one of the troubling findings actually of that study was that on the one hand, productivity went up. So that's the good part. People loved it, attrition went down, sick leave went down, etc., well-being rose, all great stuff. The troubling part was that when matched for productivity, and because it was call center workers, it's very easy to match people for productivity, those who worked remotely got promoted far less than those who worked from office at exactly the same level of productivity. So, there is that when people feel obliged to be in office because a leader is in office, it's because without anybody saying it, without them ever having read a paper on it or any research on it, they just have that sense that it'll, it's good. It's the right thing to do to show up when, a leader is there. And I can completely see how that's going to create, interesting dynamics within organizations?
In fact, I'll share a very small example. Some may think it's so tactical, but we're doing coaching sessions and learning sessions on how to conduct hybrid meetings. Imagine that you are in office as a leader, and we have faced that after the first wave was out. Between December to March, things had started becoming a bit better. People had started coming to office. You would have a situation wherein there would be a parent or a person who would be working at a remote location or at their home, and they would face the struggle to get their voice heard because the three other people in the physical meeting room are so engrossed in conversing with each other. And these are very minute, I would say, aspects of change behavior that we've pushed back and sensitized the leaders to say inclusion does not mean that you're holding a Teams meeting, but you're not bothered to look into the person. And all what you're bothered about is the three in-person colleagues that are a part of it. Second was centered around decision making. When you are in person in office, that coffee conversation leads to decisions which may have impact on somebody who's working at a far off location. So sensitizing on inclusion when critical decisions have to be made, and many others. So nuggets of those elements is what we are working towards, not necessarily to take care of some pushback, but it's just that we are not trained to operate in a hybrid format.
Yeah, which brings me to actually the final question, and I'll start with you, Manu, since you're leading so beautifully into that. What do you think are some of the new mindsets or new skills that managers need to learn while leading in a hybrid setting?
I'll put it simply, and that's been my learning as much is that as managers, we drive our entire relationship with our teams based on trust. And there are degrees of trust and there are variables of trust. But for me, it's kind of comes down to very simply transactional trust and discrete trust. Transactional is I get you to do the job, you do it on time, before time, and I'm very happy as a human being, and so are you. Discrete is that sixth sense of knowing that you'd go above and beyond to drive the network's goals. And that largely happens when there is chemistry, collaboration beyond the task and the goal. In our organization, specifically after looking at the behaviors of wave one and now after crossing hopefully the end of wave two, one of the clear dimensions which we're pushing the leaders to think about very critically is this element of trust. While you are very good in building, transactional trust by having governance meetings, ensuring you're doing your one-on-ones with your team members, ensuring that you're celebrating birthdays and you're celebrating whatever else. But that discrete trust would come in only when you will take time out to possibly give an impromptu call at 7 p.m. to a colleague and say, hey, what's happening in your life? What are you doing? So for us, the focus is a lot more on leaders getting comfortable with building relationships in a virtual format, so that when the discrete trust is strong, by design, they will be far more collaborative teams driving business growth.
I love that you say that, Manu. I must share that I think maybe a week ago, there was an article in MIT Sloan Management Review around how to design the workplace for immensely human interactions.
Yes.
And precisely because one of the things that organizations, researchers, people have discovered is that as we've worked remotely for 18-ish months, and let's see how much longer before we're able to work in person, studies have shown that people have stated that they feel less close to colleagues by actually between 20 to 25%. There are fewer close colleagues. Just response to that question: how many colleagues do you have to be close to? So one of the ideas is to design the workplace and interactions on the days when people are working together, particularly as people start returning back into the workplace, with the objective of rebuilding relationships and trust.
Yes.
So that your focus, for those workplace interactions becomes what the authors call immensely human interactions, but is frankly what you just said, that, how do we know each other? How do we get to know each other almost, get to know each other once again? And where are we in our lives? Who are we? Beyond just the tasks that, as you said, I think you called it transactional trust, that part many good managers have, been able to take care of. Vishpala, I'm wondering, what are your thoughts around the new mindsets and skills for managers in a hybrid?
I don't think there's not much to add, right? Because both of you have probably touched upon that, and I 100% agree. Like trust, relationships. I think them personally role modeling this, because you can't preach to the choir without you actually doing it, right? I think that's probably important. But I do think like one additional element is, let's not forget, I mean, yeah, pandemic or no pandemic, every organization is trying to push a change agenda, a transformation agenda. So the managers are not going to get any slack on that, right? So it's almost like these are plus. This is pretty much how you operate, how you build your teams. It's more in that sphere, but the ability for these folks to continue to push, to be agile, to transform is not going anywhere. So actually the list is getting expanded. And, one of the conversations internally was, how do you help the managers? Because, you literally are saying, hey, manager, define future of work. Hey, manager, build those individual connections. Hey, manager, don't let productivity drop. Hey, manager, push transformation. It's a lot. It's really a lot, right? So I do think like it's also about how can we help them and how can they help themselves, right? I think we stated a few challenges of the ways of working. I would put one of this as that, because how many effective people managers are actually going to hit all these sort of boxes? They're way too many now.
I completely agree with you, Vishpala. And I think one of the challenges which you've thrown up itself is that at this point, people don't have role models of this. They haven't seen how this now additional dimension of being exceptionally good at building trust, relationships, how does that going to work? So do you think that it's going to become even more important for the senior most leaders of your organization to be able to show what they mean when they are expecting something from levels down the line?
Absolutely, Dr. Shalini. I think role modeling starts always at the top, right? And I think the only difference is now there's no optionality, honestly. And I'm using the word optionality because there's no other way that they can do it, right? And I think it's going to be tough for even some of our senior leaders. And I'm putting all functions in that, because it is a change. And you touched upon that. We all have our own notions of how things can work, should work, versus how things are actually working today. So I'm not trying to critique different layers of management here, but I do think we have a mixed bag across the organization, whether it's junior, mid, senior. And I think as an organization, we have to kind of forge ahead, to your point, find those role models, tweak, learn, adapt, keep moving. And that's what the next 2 years are going to teach us, because we don't know. We're navigating the unknown.
Fantastic. So I think we're at the end of our time, and I'm just going to share, some of my biggest takeaways from both Manu, what you've said, and Vishpala, what you've said. We certainly seem to be entering a time of great experimentation. Both of your organizations are experimenting in, slightly different ways, and we're going to see perhaps many, many models of experimentation over the next couple of years, based on industry, size of organization, and perhaps philosophy of the organization and what dimensions they'd like to experiment on. And like any moment of, great transformation and change for management ideas itself, over a period of time, it will become clearer which models work well in what situations, and people will start to have, maybe from 100 different models of hybrid to maybe like 10 or 15 models that people have seen worked reasonably well in different kind of situations. And that's also, of course, going to mean that there's a lot of learning for everybody in the organization, right from senior leaders on what does it mean, what are those behaviors that they're supposed to role model now that they're coming back, what does it mean to rebuild connections and relationships and trust, how do we manage, employee expectations having shifted in these last 18 months. So we're going to enter a very interesting area where there's going to probably be, hopefully be, along with experimentation, which is inevitable, but a lot of learning for all of us, new skills for all of us, so that hybrid working becomes a reality, both in terms of how productive it is, but also how satisfying it is for all of us who participate. So with that, I'd like to thank both of you. It was such an interesting discussion. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shalini. It was a pleasure to be a part of this engaging dialogue with Vishpala and yourself.
Yeah, thank you. It was a fun afternoon. So thanks for that, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you.